Welcome, everyone. Good to have you all here. Thank you for coming. I know you're probably packaged for lunch, so we'll keep this nice and short. It's going to be very open, so I'm going to try to have a nice, friendly conversation. So if you want to interrupt anytime, ask a question, I'm more than happy to talk about stuff. So, first of all, we'll be talking about cybersecurity lessons from space aliens. Many of you probably came for the title. So, how many of you have watched the movie Independence Day? Okay, okay. That's good. I don't have to explain a lot then. So, first off, a little bit about my background and what I do. So, I happen to run the PC security channels where I basically test cybersecurity solutions on YouTube. And a lot of people seem to enjoy watching it. So, that's fun. You might be wondering, well, if I test cybersecurity solutions, what brings me to HackSpaceCon? But before that, I just want to talk a little bit about what we'll be covering during this talk. We'll be talking a little bit about the importance of information in warfare. We'll be talking about some cybersecurity lessons from the movie Independence Day. And we will also be showing some real world test results. So wait to find out if your favorite EDR solution fails. All right, so a little bit about why this talk is inspired by the movie. So this was one of the favorite movies I had growing up. This in Jurassic Park definitely got me interested in cybersecurity. Many of you might have watched the movie at a stage where you didn't really realize it was about cybersecurity. You might think, well, I remember the cool jet planes and the aerial fights and all of that. But at the core of the movie is, of course, a virus that takes down the alien defense systems that allows us to defeat them essentially. And it even starts a little bit with signals analysis. So a lot of the movies I watched growing up inspired me to get into this field of cybersecurity because they helped me connect the work we do behind the scenes with real world results and consequences. Because a lot of times we're working behind the computers, we're working with very technical stuff, and it's hard to see why it matters. And I think movies like this really showcase the impact that some of the work that we will do in the cyber realm is going to have on people's lives. Also, another thing that makes me interested is networks. So you have two networks over here if you look at the screen. So one is a centralized network and the other is a decentralized network. Also, as you can see, I have an interest in aviation. I do love flying gliders. It's another thing that interests me in the movie. But we'll talk a little bit about the difference between a centralized network system versus a decentralized network system and why that matters from a cybersecurity standpoint. So, bit of summary of the movie for those of you who may not have seen it. I think there might be only one or two. Um, but basically, Earth is attacked by aliens. We try to fight back, but their defenses are impenetrable. So we install a virus, and that is how we eventually manage to beat them and save humanity. It, of course, starts off with this opening shot of the moon landing, which is very inspiring. I got to see it at the Kennedy Space Center, as many of you may have, thanks to HackSpaceCon. So obviously, love coming out here. Now, this is how the movie begins. So there's this giant spaceship that approaches major cities like New York, like in the screenshot. And it's quite intimidating. But what's happening behind the scenes is the aliens are using our satellite systems. And they're using it to coordinate among themselves because they can't really see each other because the curvature of the Earth prevents direct line of sight between the spaceships. So they start off with information warfare. They start using our satellites to relay signals that's going to allow them to coordinate their attack. This is a major plot point. And before we get too carried away with the movie, I want to touch on some real world incidents that tell us why information warfare is going to be very important in the future. So, first off, I'm going to show you the screenshot. Some of you may recognize it. This is from Ukraine. This is, of course, the convoy, the Russian convoy that was famously 40 miles long. And of course, it most of it didn't never made it to Kiev, thankfully. But it shows the importance of having accurate real world data when it comes to real warfare, not just cyber attacks. Now, more recently, some of you may have heard of the conflict between India and Pakistan that has flared up recently. I think we have a ceasefire that's holding at the moment, but this is another conflict that really reiterated to me the importance of information warfare because both sides claimed victory in this conflict, as is always the case. And even today, it's very hard to know what actually happened and who actually won. Pakistan claimed they shot down 5 fighter jets. Now, Indians have not confirmed or denied the claim. So, how do you know? Now, Indians claim they struck various bases in Pakistan. The only way we have any reliable evidence of this is via satellite images. So if you have your own military satellites, you can at least confirm that you've hit the targets. Now, what if your satellites are taken out by the enemy? Well, you're kind of blind. Fog of war is a very real concept, and it was very relevant back in the day. And I think with the internet and the information sharing we have now, we like to think that maybe there's not that much of fog of war because, eventually we'll find out. But not really. I mean, if you look at the outcome of this conflict, both sides claim victory. And I think if you do a poll, most people in both countries believe that their country fared better or they won. So, not only does this information warfare affect intelligence or military actions or decisions, it also impacts political outcomes because the perception of victory or defeat may be what defines whether one party stays in power or not, or even the type of government. So, for example, in Pakistan, the military establishment and the government needs the perception of victory to stay in power. And satellite imagery, or lack thereof, is very important. So here's another example of doctored imagery showing different complexes that were claimed to be hit. But again, thanks to satellite imagery from India, we figured out that they were not actually hit. It was just runway maintenance work. So again, especially with AI, we have real-time information that's coming out so fast, especially during conflict when these things are trending. And we have even official sources using or citing them in order to score political points. So having reliable, accurate information is really going to be a huge part of every conflict in the future. Back to the movie. So that's obviously the Empire State Building, famous shot where it gets struck by the giant alien space laser, we can call it that. It's their equivalent of like a nuclear weapon, I guess. And the devastation is astounding. We have some cinematic shots of the White House blowing up. This is the extent of the devastation. So obviously, what do? We scramble the jets. We try to fight back. But when the jets launch their missiles, they strike this shield. It's kind of like the real world equivalent of an antivirus, I guess. And nothing really is able to get through. We even try nukes, but that doesn't work either. And that's the president, of course, in Independence Day. And you can see the despair on his face when nothing works. So the solution comes from, again, an unlikely place. Cable repairman decides that we might be able to disable their defenses by implanting a virus in their mothership. So the aliens, they came with this structure where they had this massive mothership that was out in space, and they had these smaller destroyers that were over major cities causing the destruction. Now, their intelligence, presumably, was in the mothership. So we would have to fly out there into space, dock with it, install the virus there, and that would disorient the ships below. That's the idea in the movie. Now, the important thing here is the type of network. So as you can see, this is a centralized network. So you have all of these smaller ships. Now, because of the curvature of the Earth, they're not necessarily communicating with each other. They're communicating with the mothership, the central node. And because of that, anything that happens on the central node is going to filter to all of them down below. Now, this is something we see a lot with modern attacks. We've gotten to a stage where I think we have very centralized defense mechanisms. So let's say most people are using solutions like Windows Defender. If you look at detections, we're all using Google Cloud, AWS, the same 3 or 4 cloud solutions, and a lot of them are also sharing infrastructure. So if an attack is able to infiltrate a major supply chain, then it's not a case of infecting one computer or 2 computers. They infect everything that's remotely connected. I mean, we saw that with the 3CX situation. There was an instance where the whole CCleaner application was malware for a few days, and it only takes a window of a few days in order to, get everybody's credentials or install a remote access Trojan. And it's a similar case in the movie because we were only able to take down their defenses for a few minutes, but that, of course, gives us enough time to attack them. So here's a screenshot of the actual virus window, as you can see. Back then, everything looked like this. It looked cooler. Like hacker movies always make it look cooler. I wish I had an upload virus. I mean, somebody should make an actual UI, like a virus total, but it looks like this. Now, it's not a bad analogy because you've got the zeros and ones, so that's obviously the binary code, and you've got something that looks like an analog signal back when those mattered. So, of course, one of the things about the aliens in Independence Day that's highlighted is there were these extra, biological. They had these biomechanical suits, and they didn't really communicate. They had no languages. They didn't talk to each other. They communicated via telepathy. So if you think about it from a cybersecurity perspective, if you can do telepathy, like if you can see each other's thoughts, there's not really a lot of paradigm for how you defend yourself from an adversary trying to infiltrate your information space. Because if you're like a hive mind, you already know everything. And I think, that kind of myopic thinking can infiltrate a lot of our organizations today because everything is so interconnected and so centralized that it's hard to kind of imagine an adversary on the inside. We're always thinking about an adversary coming from the outside, but in a lot of recent attacks, with the attacks in Las Vegas, for example, where famous hotels got hacked, even the recent Marks and Spencer's attack in the UK that took down our favorite shopping outlet, the attacks relied on contractors or people on the inside exposing their credentials. And I think it's going to be more and more important to understand who is actually on the inside. And it's a harder question than you think. Because, for example, in the UK, we have the NHS, which is the National Healthcare Service. But it's not really one organization because there's so many private labs, there's so many people carrying out tests, and they're feeding that data to the NHS. So when one of them, even if one of the labs like Symphonus got hit by ransomware, that exposed a lot of clinical data and a lot of test records, and also meant people who were due to have surgeries or needed to have medical procedure, now they couldn't because that data was not available anymore to the NHS because of one of their partners being hacked. So back to the movie, fun stuff. So that's an F-18 fighting with an alien equivalent jet, name it whatever you like. And again, President takes the pilot's seat. I belong in the air. And ultimately, we managed to take down the spaceship with some heroics, obviously, and things go down. But of course, the final fun part is running jollyroger.exe. This is the part that I remembered as a kid. And as you can see, what it does is doesn't really do much, but it shows this laughing skull on all the alien screens. Get wrecked, doob. So DEF CON is going to love this. And then, of course, we leave the mothership with a nuclear weapon that kind of blows up. And those are the final seconds. And yeah, pretty epic explosion there. So let's talk about some of the lessons from the movie. So, one of them is obviously the danger of centralization, of relying too heavily on one particular source, one particular vendor. We saw this again with the CrowdStrike incident. So this is a beautiful screenshot. So you can see planes taking off from the United States. That's the United States airspace right there, before and after the attack. You might have seen this if you've been following the incident. But what essentially happened was CrowdStrike with an update. So this is a security solution. There's been no malware attack, no adversary, but we've had an update that's been posted, and because the update is flawed, computers have a blue screen of death, and that takes out more computers than I believe any ransomware or security incident has. Similar example, reliance on Windows Defender. So I have a command on the screen, cmd run.exe-remove definitions. Now, you might think Windows Defender is a decent security solution. So how does malware ever get in? How do people get infected? And I think there's an entire market of info stealers that relies on this one command. So what this command does is it removes all the virus definitions, all the recent definitions, allowing anybody to run recent malware. And now all of a sudden it's not detected. And you wouldn't notice anything's wrong because Windows Defender is still turned on and working. If we take a look at the top malware submissions, in the user space, it's quite clear. It's Luma Stealer. It's threats that are showing up in YouTube videos, on social media, that are trying to pretend to be cheats or whatever, and getting people to download stuff and infecting their computer, creating these massive botnets. They're not just used for, well, necessarily affecting the victims themselves, but then creating this world of fake accounts that a nation state could potentially use. So now to the fun stuff. As I promised, we're going to show you some live tests of modern solutions. So we're going to run some attack simulations, and yeah, you can see how your favorite solution fares. So we'll start off with detection. You may have seen some, you may have heard of Windows Defender, CrowdStrike, Sentinel-1. What we did is we did a ransomware simulation where we tried to replicate the behavior of modern ransomware, but we didn't use popular ransomware because obviously it's already detected. So we tried to build our own simulation to see if the behavior itself is what is blocked. So here we go. Hopefully we can get the video playing. And you can see the results in real time. So we have a bunch of documents on the desktop, and I want you to watch and see how everything gets encrypted or not. So first up, we have Windows Defender, which is default protection everybody uses, and it does not really block our encryption process. Now, Bitdefender thankfully does. It did detect the attack path. Next, we're going to try Sentinel-1. And again, our data gets encrypted. I'm going to try CrowdStrike next. And once again, not good. Data gets encrypted. And lastly, we'll try Sophos. And it did manage to intercept the attack. So even today, surprising as it may be, it is not impossible to beat a modern EDR solution if you're able to infiltrate and get to the point where you're able to execute malware on the system. So modern ransomware still works, attacks are still successful. But when I talk to CISOs, a lot of the times what I hear is also often a lot of attackers manage to disable whatever protection you're running before they run their ransomware. And It's important to really look into the configuration of your defenses, and again, not just rely blindly on having a particular solution or having um, an instance of review once like every 3 or 4 years, because a lot of the times these solutions, like unless they're configured correctly, they're not really going to be that effective. So another approach to cybersecurity that's kind of the opposite of, I guess, what we saw with the space aliens would be using zero trust. So instead of allowing everything by default, telepathy, we do the opposite. We assume everything's an adversary. Now, there's obviously pros and cons to using a zero trust approach. It requires a lot more configuration. It requires a much better understanding of the assets that you have, whether or not these assets are part of your organization. What do you trust? What do you not trust? It requires stringent access control, knowing what employees have access to what, and sometimes it's just easier to just allow everything. But when done correctly, it can work. So we've been testing another solution, ThreatLocker, which applies a zero trust mechanism. And I'll play another video of the same ransomware execution here. And of course, it is blocked because it's not part of the domain of what we're supposed to be executing. Now, another recent incident I want to talk about a little bit here is the hack that took down 4chan. I don't know if you guys saw that, but the entirety of 4chan, the website, went down. Sadly, there's nothing juicy that came out of it. People wanted some .gov email so they could potentially say, hey, this guy was on 4chan. But mostly what happened is the site went down. The admins, the moderators, their data came out. But the way they did that is they used a very old bulletin board system. Hadn't been updated for like 10 years. And they found a vulnerability where they're able to upload a PDF, essentially. In the place of like an image, like, a post, you can upload a PDF. Now, the way the PDF is processed in the back end means it can run PostScript code. And because this is a vulnerable system, well, you run a malicious command and boom, a couple of steps, you have root access, and then, you're in trouble, 4chan. So a similar thing to keep in mind is, I guess, the type of stuff you allow to execute in any environment. And this is going to be another example of like, PDF malware execution on a Windows system. And we're going to play through this real quick. So if you have a vulnerable software on your system, it can often be like the entry point, obviously, to an attacker. Again, access control, zero trust is a very effective way of mitigating against threats like that. So I think the important takeaway from Independence Day as a movie is essentially twofold. We've got to look at using adversarial techniques or adversary simulation as an advantage. I mean, viruses and malware, as bad as they are, that's what saves the world in Independence Day. So as cybersecurity researchers, we should be thrilled. That's why we have a job. Because there was a time, if we go back, like when, any kind of playing with malware was considered evil. But of course, we're well past that now. But the second lesson, which I think is more relevant today, is the real danger of going into that complacency where everything works so well. Just like the aliens, their defenses were so impenetrable. They were so confident that they never really thought about an adversary getting into the mothership and, disorienting all of their smaller ships. For aliens that are so technologically advanced, that had so effective defenses, this one Achilles heel is what essentially takes them down in the end. So I think it's very important to think about, no matter how large your organization, whatever you're doing, try to build a very diverse defense strategy. Don't rely on one thing. Try to have variation, try to use different solutions. This, again, something I've seen doing research into detection and security solutions over the years, because before people would have 10 different AVs. And I'm not saying it was a better time, because those of you who use Windows XP know it was not a better time for malware. But we had a lot more variation in terms of the defenses that an attacker has to infiltrate. So we had a lot more individual people getting infected, but the impact was largely contained. Whereas now, I think we have a situation where individual infections are not as important, not all the time, but we have major incidents that cost a lot of money, have a lot of impact, and are simply not acceptable. So if you're like working in this space, I would highly recommend doing a review of your access control procedures, looking into different solutions, testing them with the current configurations. Because a lot of times when I go out and I test different enterprise defenses, one of the common vulnerabilities that I see is people have configured an EDR solution 6 months ago, and then something happens in IT. Somebody's like, hey, I need to make this configuration change because it's not allowing this or that. And what they don't realize is once you make that change, then you execute ransomware that's 10 years old and it goes straight through. I mean, nobody bothered to test it. So I'll conclude with that. Thank you all so much for tuning in. If you're interested, obviously, you can check us out on YouTube at the PC Security channel. You're welcome, very welcome to join our Discord community. Super fun. We also have bi-weekly, roughly, catch-ups with John Hammond, another YouTuber who's here. So you get 2 for the price of 1 if you join our Discord. And yeah, I'm happy to take any questions or, entertain any discussions, any thoughts you might have, or, anything you want to say about the movie, why it inspired you. So I'll have it all over to you guys. Thank you. Go ahead.
So, you were at my talk yesterday, and I was talking about graph theory as well and network science. I'm curious why you took the graphical approach yourself. Like, what inspired you to talk about network?
Right. Yeah. Good question. So, yeah, I'll get into a little bit of a story here. So, when I was doing my master's in computer science, one of the things, obviously, I was into gaming. And if you've played a first person shooter or like a fast game, you know that latency or ping is like really important. If you have like a more than 50 or 100 millisecond ping, it's really hard to like, figure out how you're playing. Now imagine networks in space. Now you're not working with a millisecond latency, you're working with a multi-minute latency. So if we're sending signals from one satellite, like communicating with them, we tell them something, and then 10 minutes later, the thing moves. So imagine trying to control a robot on Mars. And that is where I think a distributed network really comes into play. There are also other situations like in traffic. A centralized communication system, not only is it less reliable, it's also less effective, because if you've got two satellites or 2 rovers communicating on Mars, the last thing you want is the rover to communicate something to Earth, base station, and then base station to have to go back to the rover. So what you need is a network of these interconnected nodes that does not go back to the center. And that is what DTNs or distributed networks are all about. And I think, again, with Independence Day, it really shows when you have a centralized mothership and everything relying on it, if the central node goes, everything else goes with it. Whereas if you have a DTN structure, then you can have like half of the network basically be taken out and the other half is still fully operational. So that was one of my, master's projects that got me doing a lot of research into space stuff. So yeah, hopefully that answers the question. Anybody else?
What's your take on Independence Day resurgence?
That's a tough one. Yeah, like with most sequels, it's never as good as the original. I like that it's based in London, so I can see, where I live getting destroyed. That's always fun. But yeah, other than that, movie wise, it definitely doesn't hit the same, the same. All right. Any other questions, thoughts, comments?
I'll ask one.
Yeah.
So if your ransomware bypassed S1 and
Yeah.
CrowdStrike,
Yeah.
did any detections trigger in those platforms, or did your ransomware completely bypass everything?
No, it was so yeah, it was a complete bypass in this case. A lot of them have since then added signatures or added detections for it. But at the time we ran the test, we purposefully built this using VBNet, very large sample. It was 60 megabyte code. So again, typically what an EDR solution would not expect as traditional malware. But that is the goal of a lot of these tests. It's not necessarily to see if they can block the malware. It's more to see, can they block this approach? Because it's very hard to test solutions these days, because they have so much information advantage on whoever's testing. So if you're testing a security solution, they have way more threat intel than you. They have thousands of people who will get an alert anytime a new malware is spotted. So you spotting the malware and testing it ahead of time is just not possible. The same is the issue with, I think, a lot of the test labs. So if you watch AV Comparatives, AV Test, all the popular test labs, if you look at any modern test, all the solutions score 99.9% detection. And it's because, well, I mean, the solutions themselves have a bigger team to go out and look for threats than the test labs. So it's going to be very hard for us to effectively test defenses. And it doesn't mean that we're impenetrable to malware. Malware still gets through all the time. It's just that that method of testing is, I don't think it's going to be very, useful in the future. I think we're going to have to do adversary simulations where we kind of break the assumptions, we design attack methods based on the way the attackers think, because a lot of times the attackers these days, they're targeted attacks, so they know what solution you have, they know what they need to do to get around it, and that is their starting point. So nobody's doing the test as the AV or the EDR expects. All right, anything else? Any other questions, comments? All right, we can wrap up then. Thank you very much.